Welcome to the Master Your Millions podcast, the show all about your financial potential and leaving a legacy for future generations. Here are your hosts, Jason and Scott Henderson.
Well, thanks, Scott, for that introduction, and everyone that's listening to us on YouTube. You can see that Scott really isn't with us on this episode. However, I'm excited to be able to finally introduce Martin Papp. Of all the different guests that we've had, and we've had some fairly well-known guests, Martin's been a little difficult to pin down to get a time with him. He's a very busy man. Not so much as that he's going here and there, it's the fact that the theirs are like China and Singapore and Europe and all these different places. So getting pinned down on time where we can work together, I'm so excited to have him here. So originally, Martin is from Colorado Springs. He's married, has one child, and he has an incredibly diverse background. And the thing that makes me excited about that is that it can bring so much to our discussion with our podcast of how to create, enjoy, and pass on your millions, your wealth. So one of those cool, diverse backgrounds is the fact that he has lived about a decade in China at one point in time in his life. So, Martin, great to have you, and thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Jason. Great to be here. Let's talk.
So what on earth made you decide you're going to pick up and move from Colorado and go to China?
Yeah, well, it's a good origin story. I think the easiest way for me to succinctly say why I moved abroad to China was putting in context that era, that time period. So I graduated from college in 2008 from St. Lawrence University, upstate New York. And I'd always had a bug for traveling, and I always liked exploring new cultures. And we all know that graduating in 2008 was right into the economic crisis in the United States, really the entire world. And so it wasn't the best time to be, working your way into the new workforce, finding a job. And I was reading a book at the exact same time, very serendipitous, the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, which I think
good book.
You read that one? Yeah.
So keep going.
So there's a lot of takeaways from it, right? A lot of different things people can glean from that. But for me, it was a really clear example of where environment is such an important factor of your success. And it's not just about you and how smart you are. It's about when you were born, where you were born, who you knew, what resources you had at your disposal. And I had just
first order.
Yeah,
the youngest.
Yeah, exactly. And I had just read an excerpt where he was, and forgive me if I butcher this, but the paraphrasing, they did a study of the cohorts between people that were born between 1900 and 1905 versus people that were born in 1905 to 1910, and through their lifespan, their income was significantly different. So the wealth that they generated over their lifetime was significantly different just from 5 years apart. And the question was, why is that? And the argument was that one of the cohorts graduated right into the Great Depression in 1929, and that had long-term impact on not only their skills that they were developing, their job prospects, but as also long-term expectations of what they wanted in life. Like it has an impact on your psyche, on your psychology, everything. And I'm reading this and being like, oh, I'm graduating into the recession of our time. This is bad news. I need to go somewhere where I'm going to be given opportunities, a place that's growing. And, the China over the last 40 years, really up until the pandemic, has been growing at extremely fast rates, double digits at one point. And so I felt the urge to challenge myself, go learn a new language. And I had done a political science major, so I had studied a little bit about China. and ended up moving to Jiangxi Nanchang with the intention of learning Chinese. And Jiangxi Nanchang, by the way, is a city that probably nobody's really familiar with, and yet it's still a city of 8 million people, and it's the capital of Jiangxi province. And so I go there with this in complete total immersion and just focused on learning Chinese, and that turned into a 10-year 10-year endeavor.
Wow. And did you have any friends or anything? You just showed up on the plane and here I'm going to this city and I need to find an apartment.
Yeah, well, so the only thing you have to think about in terms, well, definitely no friends, didn't know anybody, but you have to think about how you're going to have your visa there. So going as a tourist, you're going to have limitations. So I needed to find some way to get a job or a work visa, and the easiest way to do that, especially in the 2000s, was to teaching English. So I got a job teaching English at uh, uh, 交通华东大学. Which was the East China Transportation University. And so I met, so that somebody picked me up at the airport when I came in. But yeah, I basically had a guitar, a backpack, and didn't know really anybody. But that was kind of the exploration of it. That was the excitement. So I was very much ready for it, and I embraced everything that was different about it, and worked really hard to pick up the language as quickly as I could. And it was definitely, I think, one of the best decisions I ever made, because I think it propelled me into my career and everything that I'm doing.
Wow, that is so cool. And I take it for the fact that there's a company out there called Papp's Tea, and you are the owner, founder of all that. How did that come about? Is that while you're in China, you recognize that, hey, there's different types of tea here that I really like that we need to bring back to the States, or tell us kind of the genesis there.
Sure. So a little bit of a caveat, but I think it's kind of a fun little story, is that I started playing music. I always played music, but I was playing music in some bars in Jiangxi province, and there was
For
there
extra
was
money or for
yeah.
fun?
Well, it's both, like it was really just a passion of playing music, but yeah, you make money from it too. And there was this there's this, again, I'm like maybe one out of like 8 white people in the entire city. And so you stick out, and there was this bar that they had, that the title of the bar was called Hotel California. And I went in there and said, "Hey, I could play that song." And they just loved me. And so they brought me in. They wanted me to come as often as I could. And so I started playing there, weekly, and would make a few hundred, R&B a night. But it kind of like, well, this is kind of interesting. Well, maybe I could play some more places, some other places. And I ended up starting doing more music. Man, you should have seen the stuff I was doing. I grew up in Colorado going to Red Rocks concerts. I was a total like musician, but what they wanted was a Backstreet Boy. They wanted a person that would sing up with the mic and do some dancing, and so I did some very embarrassing things during that time, but just having a good time. So I was going to bars and singing, and yeah, I like danced to like Backstreet Boy songs and stuff. It was pretty nuts. Um, but at the time, like there wasn't the social media like there is now, so I don't have any embarrassing footage to share. But
I was going to say, I wonder if there's
yeah,
any incriminating evidence out there
yeah,
that we could
there
find to bring forward.
there's definitely stuff you can find, but not of that particular dance. Um, Anyway, so I was doing music, and I was realizing that this actually also could be a career here. And so I ended up taking it more seriously. I had a friend introduce me to a singing competition called 快乐男生, which means happy boys, like super boys, kind of a spin-off of American Idol. And I did that
Is it
in
televised?
oh yeah, it was all over the country, very popular. And I ended up doing that uh, in our province, and I got first place. And then from there, I went to the national competition in Hunan, where it's based in Changsha, and I got into the top 30 of the country. And at that point, I got out, but I was, the only foreigner standing. I was singing in Chinese and all this, and a Beijing record label company flew me out to Beijing, and I signed a contract with them for 3 years. So for about 3 years, between 2010 to 2013, I was doing music full time in China and touring around China, doing all sorts of shows. The most random stuff you could think of. Like I was going into like the middle of like Inner Mongolia and singing at like a real estate ceremony where they cut the ribbon for these new apartment buildings being built. It was very common at that time when you had these big corporate developments that you would have some big celebration at the end. And so there was a lot of performance demand. And so I made quite a bit of money doing that. I ended up meeting my wife also, and got married in Sichuan province. And at that point, after we got married in 2014, we were having a lot of conversations about the future and where we were headed. And I knew that I didn't want to be a roadshow kind of musician my whole life. And I'd always had the entrepreneurial kind of bug in me. Like, again, I went to school for political science and economics. I was reading business books, but here I am, a musician in China. So I knew that for me, even being a musician in some ways was being an entrepreneur in this scenario. But I identified an opportunity, and we created a business plan. We called it PAPP'S TEA, and it was realizing that as much as people love drinking tea in China, it is a tea drinking culture. And yet, at that time, when I would have friends ask me to hang out, they would still try to go and take me to a Starbucks. And I was like, you don't even like coffee that much. You guys are always drinking tea. Why are we hanging out at a Starbucks? Let's go to some tea houses. And the problem was, at the time, this is different now. China changes really fast. But in 2013, tea houses were still too traditional. They were expensive. They were very ceremonial. It wasn't something that you would just casually meet up with a friend and say, "Hey, as a young person, like let's go grab a cup of tea." Like it wouldn't be like that. It would be, $40 for this like special Longjing ceremony where they'd come out when you'd have a little private room and everything. It was just too formal. And so people were flocking to this more casual space. And I realized that there was an opportunity here to modernize the tea concept. And I had seen it done in the US. I'd seen Tavana, David's tea in Canada. And I was like, well, let's do that in China. And so we'll do everything that I'm seeing in the West and how Western culture looks at tea. It's cool, it's new, it's international. Teas from India, herbs like mate from South America. All of these things were very new concepts in China, even though they had done so much tea. It was only focused on traditional tea culture. And without getting into the weeds of it all, started a tea company. We got venture capital funding from a VC firm in Shanghai, and we started opening up tea stores. Then that's evolved over the course of 10 years to where I still own the business. It's profitable, it's running. We have 2 offices, one in Beijing, one in Shanghai. And we solely focus now on product. And so we closed down our brick and mortar stores in 2020 during the pandemic. And now we solely focus on supplying really great teas, blended teas, herbal teas, loose leaf tea bags to other restaurants and hotels across China. So I only sell in China. It's still a huge market. And we're in over 400 locations across the country now.
Wow.
That's the
That's
PAPP'S
a
TEA
huge market.
story.
It's like 1.5 billion or something. It's only a
Yeah.
major portion of the
A lot of
world's population.
The next question usually is asked, well, why not bring your tea company to the US? And that's kind of what I was alluding to. I was like, listen, like coming to the US sounds nice. It'd be fun, but it'd be a totally different business plan, a different value proposition to the customer. I would have to change so much. I would have to redo logistics, everything. So it is essentially like creating another company. And my question was always like, why? Like I still have so much more market that I need to focus and can grow in China, which is going to be, I think, a better use of my time. I remember, for the sake of with the risk of dragging on conversation, I found this really interesting. There was a beer company in Denmark that was very famous, very well known in the whole country. They had come over to China to think about doing a couple stores, a couple breweries around Shanghai and Beijing, and they were just the talk of the town. They're like, "Ooh, these guys are coming into town," and I'm worried I'm going to mispronounce their name, but it's the McKellers or something like that. And I didn't know anything about them, but they were like, "Oh, these guys in Europe are super famous," and I was like, "This is cool." And so I had really looked up to this brand coming to China, and I was excited to see how they were going to do. And then as I was looking at the kind of the stats of their market, you realize that Denmark, and where the service that they're providing is really to a market of about 6 million people. And 6 million people was about the same size as the district that I was in China, in Chaoyangqu in Beijing. And so the scale of the market in China is just so vastly different. And it's like, oh, like, of course they want to come to China. They've saturated already a district, of their business. I'm trying to expand into over, 17 different cities across China, that are well over, 700 million people in these cities. So a lot of success, and I think a lot of what Americans especially have a difficult time understanding, and understandably so, is the massive size and scale of business in China. It's just everything times 10, or times 20 even. I'm from Colorado Springs, which is considered a decent sized city, 500,000 people approximately. But that would be, I could name you 30 cities in China that you've never heard of, that would all be, larger or equal to the top largest 10 cities in Europe that we all know, like Paris, London. All of these cities aren't even as large as Chongqing. But how many people know anything about Chongqing? So there's a big mismatch in our education from Westerners thinking about their perception of the world, that we think very highly of our place in the world. We're the center of attention, without realizing that at the end of the day, we're still much of a minority. Like, we're a small group of people compared to what most of the world is doing, and we don't always see it, especially with the China firewall and the language barrier. But yeah, people, if you go and spend time in China, go live there, you realize that it is a massive place. It is big. Sorry.
What do you mean by the China firewall?
So China, the flow of information has highly regulated in China. And so Chinese people do not get access to Google. They don't get access to Facebook, Instagram. They're not getting any of that. And also kind of, therefore, vice versa, is that you don't really read all of what the Chinese people are thinking or saying, because they're not on our platforms. So it makes it feel like they're smaller than they really are. It's just because we're not on the same social medias. Even TikTok, for example. There's a TikTok for China, and then there's a TikTok for the United States, or for the West. And so we might see some Chinese comments sometimes on like a US TikTok app, but that's very different than the billions of comments that you're getting on the Chinese TikTok app, and we don't see that. And so that's what I mean by the firewall, is that there is this lack of understanding between each other, and a lack of dialogue because of these kind of imposed restrictions.
Okay. So you come to an end, though, in China, and you finally decide to come back here to the United States, kind of, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
no longer live in China, but I'm not sure that because you have all these different ventures, if you will, that I want to kind of get into,
Sure.
and kind of talk a little bit about your philosophy and how you perceive the best way to invest in real estate, and how you came to that.
Yeah.
philosophy.
Oh, we talking about real estate? Is that what the topic of this conversation was about?
No.
How did it took like 20 minutes to get there? My bad.
Yeah, how did we go from tea to real estate? I mean, truly.
Okay, well, that's a great point. How do you get from real estate to tea? And I think it's probably how a lot of people get into real estate is that you realize that, hey, I'm making some money. I'm generating income. I've got money. Where do I put it? How do I generate wealth? And there's really, you know, there's limited options. You can go into the stock market. You can you can buy bonds if you want to be real conservative, or you buy real estate. And I think it's pretty much that simple. I feel like the system is designed uh, for wealth generation to be done with real estate. The way the tax system works, the way that things are built, there is so many benefits of putting your capital into real estate. And
And are you seeing that internationally?
well, I
Right?
think
Because you are an international man. You do
correct,
stuff in a lot of different companies, and we'll
correct.
eventually come to Nova House, which I think is German,
Uh,
right?
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, we can get to that.
but we'll get there. We'll get there, right?
Yeah,
And so, yeah, I can see your point in that real estate is a place to park some wealth and to grow wealth, a
right,
lot having to do with the tax code in the United
right.
States.
Yeah,
But is
yeah,
that the way it is in China? Is that the way it is in Singapore? Is that the way it is in Costa Rica, South America? I don't know. Tell me.
yeah. Just taking a step back. So I was, and my story is that I was doing really well with the tea company. We were making money, so we started to buy real estate, and that's how I got into the business of real estate for our own personal assets. And so we had bought apartments in China. Now, buying real estate in China is difficult, especially as a foreigner. I'm not recommending it. I'm not here to tell people to go buy property in China. In fact, the Chinese property right now in China is doing awful. But that was where I started. And luckily, because I had my wife who's Chinese, we have a lot of the benefits where I can basically have the same access to property that Chinese people can. And so we started doing short-term rentals. I was Airbnb host for 2 apartments in Beijing. But we then started putting money into other places. We ended up doing property in California once my son was born. We also bought property in Thailand as a vacation rental, and we were just kind of putting places where we liked to be. We wanted to spend more time in the U.S. We went and bought stuff in Los Angeles. I ended up doing an entire ground up development, flipped a home in West Hollywood. That was very lucrative. The rental in Thailand also very successful, and so I was just starting to put the pieces together of like, oh my God, I could see myself spending more time developing real estate as I grow my portfolio, um, because financially it makes a lot of sense, and there's just so much um, better reward for your time. So when I would sell tea, which I love tea, but you'd have to sell a lot of tea in order to make $1 billion. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Whereas, you can have a real estate agent, if they have the right contact and they sell the right home, they can also make $1 million. So it was really just thinking about what can I do that has high value impact with my time. And I think real estate is one of those places where you can generate outsized wealth um, for the same amount of time that it would take for me to get a contract with a hotel to sell some tea. I could spend that exact same amount of time and make 10 times the amount of money because I built a fund for real estate. So there's a lot that goes into that, but strictly on the international real estate, this is what I'll say. Once you kind of realize that the world is not as intimidating as you might think, you get out there, you start doing stuff, and you realize that a lot of the world operates with similar principles, and real estate is one of them. Everybody understands the value of real estate. Owning land and owning property that's useful will generate you wealth. And the appreciation in property is not something that is only found in the United States. In fact, I would argue that the United States, in some ways, has become very mature, very competitive, very difficult to make money in real estate. You have to be really savvy these days, and you can be a little bit more of a uh, you can make more mistakes, I think, in foreign markets. Actually, it's more forgiving because a lot of these foreign markets aren't as developed. there's more opportunities. There's more opportunity for you to be the shark and not the little fish. And so I found also through property acquiring in Costa Rica, which is another place I'd love to visit, that if you have the right contacts and you have the right way of thinking to go about something safely, and that means doing your research, doing good due diligence, not rushing into anything. Like, I don't just go out and buy property that looks pretty because I saw it on a Remax window. It starts with developing the right relationships, talking to lawyers, attorneys, finding out what areas of Costa Rica are doing well, using data. Air DNA is a great resource if you're into rentals. That is global. Air DNA Enterprise, it's a little expensive, but I can get you really minute data on how it is in Bali, and not only how is it in Bali, but which areas of Bali are trending, which areas are good. You then can talk to Airbnb hosts, go on Airbnb platform and find the best hosts, the ones that are crushing it. Get on a phone call with them. Tell them that you're interested in following in their footsteps and doing something similar. You might get some that say, no, I'm not interested, your competition, whatever. But you'll also find some people that are very gracious, that love telling their story. And I even had, that's how my whole Costa Rica experience started, is a guy that's running a really beautiful boutique hotel in Santa Teresa. He brought me in, showed me everything he's doing. We were even like screen sharing his QuickBooks and all of the expenses and what it takes to run a business in Costa Rica. There's so much resources available with the technology we have to learn how to do things in these other countries. You just have to kind of have the mental ambition to take the time to go find the answers, to go learn it. And man, this is such a wide topic that I feel like I could probably go another hour. But if you have a more directed question, I'd be happy to funnel it there.
We're going to jump in right here, as Martin's interview as being incredible and free-flowing. We're going to split this into 2 episodes. So we're going to sign off now and invite you to come back next week for part 2.
Thanks for listening to Master Your Millions with Jason and Scott Henderson. Check the show notes for any links or contact information about today's guest. Make sure to follow the show so you don't miss any future episodes.